Very much the focus post the whole thing has been on the vaccine. And there has been a group of people who have lost their minds over this and become what I call anti-vax nutters. And that has been counterproductive, Des, because we're not looking at the issues that you are talking about this morning, the real strategic blunders, because we become so focused on the vaccine and whether or not Pfizer I don't know, have got horns growing out of their heads, and we just we're looking down blind alleys rather than at the big picture.
Oh, that's absolutely right, Sean, but while I certainly wouldn't support conspiracy theorists or the anti-vaxxers, they have a faith-based position. That faith is not based on inherent facts, it's based on faith. It's an endowed belief. They only pay attention to stuff which supports that belief. But to be fair to them, as we progress through those 3 years of the active COVID management, we lost faith in government and we lost faith in conventional media because they misled us too often. And conventional media became propagandists and they simply maintained the government propaganda. And if you look at the definition of propaganda, which I know you know, and then look at the sorts of stuff we were being fed from Wellington, it absolutely conforms to the definition of propaganda. So as our society lost faith in the government and lost faith in the media, we looked elsewhere for information. And tragically, we went to social media, the one place where you have the most unreliable information possible. Yeah. And we were attracted to conspiracy theorists because we were anxious, we were worried, we were scared, and we didn't trust what we were hearing from the establishment. So I think the government actually created the anti-establishment movement. It absolutely enhanced the conspiracy theorists, and it promoted social media because it became an unreliable source of, and I'll use the word flippantly, the truth.
Those are really, really interesting observations. I note there are no mandates left or anything, right? But still, if you work in the health system, there are requirements that were there before for various other vaccines that you have a vaccine. I want to ask you, we do know that the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer were granted an immunity from prosecution for side effects because of the time frame, and that normal clinical trials were not carried out. We have, I think, an official admission that myocarditis occurrences in young men in particular of a certain age, the risk grows if you take the Pfizer vaccine. There are side effects that were not known of when we launched the campaign, when the campaign was launched for vaccination. Now that there is not a crisis and that COVID-19 is not pandemic in level, is it time to pull that vaccine off the market and test it properly?
Well, I don't think so, Sean. First of all, the initial testing was to bring the product to market as quickly as possible. You're quite right.
Yeah.
And the demand from the world community was, we want an expeditious development of this vaccine. The vaccine technology had been around a long time, so it wasn't a new technology, but it certainly came to market quickly. What we've had since then, though, is an extraordinarily large natural experiment in terms of the number of people who have been vaccinated. So we know more about this vaccine, actually, than almost any other vaccine on the planet. And yes, there are side effects of the vaccine, but you have to weigh that against the risks of getting the disease and the risks of those same complications from the disease. And so if you look at the number needed to treat with the vaccine to prevent harm, the number you need to give the vaccine to cause harm, it still comes up positively. It's still a valuable vaccine, and I think it'll remain part of the requirement for health workers for the foreseeable future, along with hepatitis B and all the other vaccines that we health workers are required to have. So I still think it has a positive net value. As for doing trials, there'll never be a trial as well-powered as the one we've just been through.
I hear you. I can see your logic there, absolutely. Yeah. Des, it's amazing. You're one of the few people I know who's not anti-vax, but is. I mean, it's different. It's a more nuanced approach to criticise the approach we took. I think also to say that to measure our experience of COVID, the world's experience of COVID, in only medical terms with only medical data sets is ridiculous. This has had impacts and will have impacts and consequences for years and generations to come, won't it?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think, first of all, the medical impact has been underestimated. We had groups of, again, public health people publishing last year looking at, saying the excess death rate doesn't look as though we incurred consequence because of our management of COVID. That's miles too soon. Delayed cancer treatments, missed cancer treatments, they will manifest as excess death rates over the next decade, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
It's far too soon to draw a line under the medical risks, but you're absolutely right. Murray Horn, on our review of this for the New Zealand Initiative, made it very clear. We thought the major consequence was social. It was the social schisms. It was the social upheavals. It was the level of fear generated in the community. It was the separation of kids from school. It was the fact that we now have a generation of kids, including some of my own grandchildren, who regard going to school as discretionary because they just were never.
I tried talking to a public service servant going to work in Wellington, Des.
Well, I'm not sure public servants going to work in Wellington necessarily is to the detriment.
Let's not say working. Society. That's always been a moot point, but going to the office. Des, look, I guess the $64,000 question is, and we talk about those non-medical prices that we pay and will keep paying. Do you believe, and I'm going to say any review of our response to COVID is useless if it doesn't answer this question. Could we have had the same or a lesser death rate with less imposition on the freedoms and liberties of everyday New Zealanders?
With all due respect, I think that's the only question which needs to be answered. It is the key question. I think the consequence of our COVID management is social. I think the government and its public health advisors did not take humanity into consideration sufficiently. They designed a system for species that doesn't exist, Homo rationalis. We humans are inherently irrational. We may be highly predictable. So I actually think the social harm caused dwarfs any other aspect of the COVID management. And I know you and I have talked about this before, but if I'd said to people in early 2019, given concern about a respiratory virus, we're going to preclude you from being with your loved ones when they're dying.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you go to their funeral, and women will be alone when they give birth. We'd have said, no way, that's not us. But
we did.
The extraordinary thing is, we did.
And I've got to say, when I think back, a couple of people in particular I knew during that time, one mate of mine who took his own life, and even his family couldn't have a bloody funeral. And I look back, and if there's anything that makes me angry, for me, it's that I couldn't say goodbye to this guy and be with his friends and family for that. And that really was, I look back, that was pretty dark, you know?
Oh, well, it was dark. Look, we accepted a flinty authoritarianism, which was ugly, is ugly. And, we talk about, how could situations exist like we see in the Northern Hemisphere in some countries? Well, with all due respect, it didn't take much of a frightener to shift us to a level of acquiescence with authoritarianism, which in fact is quite frightening. So I think when we look at our behaviour as a society, not only should we point at the government and their public health advisors, but I think we need to examine our own behaviours and our own propensity to look after ourselves and stuff the rest of the planet.
Yeah, I absolutely hear this.